Okay, I'm not doing this quick enough because I'm ranting afterwards, so I'm going to do that again. Right, well, we've all seen the lady from Uganda who's on the news, on Sky News, and everybody else is picking it up, and she's in tears because she couldn't get the letters out of the house that was burnt down in Belfast quick enough, which is disgusting. I'm not condoning that whatsoever. But let's just unpick this because they're basically using it to grace sympathy and empathy from the British public. That is what they're doing. And obviously, when you're thinking her last letters, you think, "Oh Christ, the worst." But it wasn't the worst, was it? Because what actually happened is she left Uganda, left her kids behind, and her husband or her mother looking after her kids, and came to the UK. So let's look what a nurse gets in Uganda per month. It's about $100. Okay, so that's $1,200 a year. In average in this country is £40,000. To be a nurse. So that would be the equivalent because it's 40,000 is 35 times more than, I haven't even converted it, than $1,200. So it's actually slightly more because obviously the way the pound and the dollar works. But that is the equivalent of £1.4 million in this country. So she's on the equivalent of £1.4 million in Uganda, which means that she's sending all her money home. So she's not an asylum seeker. She's not an immigrant that needs a home. She's an economic migrant, and at some point she'll go back home, because obviously I want to go back home to be with her children. Everybody wants to be with their children, but this was no different with the Depression in the 1930s with America, where people would go away, and the same in this country at times during the 1800s and everything else. To make money to send home to their families. But let's also look at Uganda at the moment because they have a unique, would I call it unique? They have some problems. Now, there's internet and social media suppression within the country at the moment. And there's been a few protests to try and get the government out because they're not agreeing with the government at the moment. And you're not going to believe why. Well, the problem with Uganda is at the moment is it borders Sudan and the Republic of Congo. So they have a massive influx of refugees, massive influx to beyond capacity into their country. And the people are getting mad about it because obviously they don't have enough money to actually deal with it. Starting to sound familiar? So there's conflicts are opening up within the country, and conflicts between the refugees coming across from Sudan is also opening up. But then you're going, well, what's that got to do with nurses? Well, Doctors Without Borders are trying to cope with this. Doctors Without Nurses as well, obviously, are trying to cope with this issue. So then I went down the rabbit hole to see how many frontline workers they're looking for within healthcare. And they're looking for, this is just nurses, not doctors, 24,000. They're looking for 24,000 nurses. They have vacancies for 24,000 nurses in Uganda. Now, they're after 13,000 midwives and 11,000 nurses at this present moment in time because they physically don't have enough to cope, A, with the refugees and B, with their own populace. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, I know that there's some form of international law around this, and I know that the framework policy to do with the UK is you can't take key workers out of the country. But there's a loophole. Because what the UK policy framework says is you are not permitted to take or recruit key workers from any country that obviously needs their key workers, like nurses, like doctors, and they come under that. So what they're doing is the UK government has basically got recruitment firms, and they pay kickbacks to recruitment firms in Nigeria and Uganda and everywhere else to use the loophole to get them to apply privately. Now, if you apply privately, it's a loophole within the law because they privately applied. And how many nurses did they take away from Uganda last year? 1,000. So in 2025, they took 1,000 nurses from Uganda, from a country that desperately needs nurses because people can't get doctors or nurses or anything, and people are dying. This is why I get fucking angry about these libtards. So our UK government is basically made a policy. They circumvented the policy to get cheaper nurses from abroad. And before everybody goes, this is why, well, we need them for the NHS. Yeah, grand, we do need them for the NHS. But what you're actually saying is the people over here can die of minor ailments only as long as we're okay. You are the most selfish. God, it just really fucking annoys me. I've travelled the world and I've seen the same problems everywhere. What this is no different to, they go on about colonialism and taking advantage of other countries and everything else. Well, what is this? What is this? You are physically taking somebody who's a key worker, and the country's desperate for them, and you're going, fuck everybody over there. I'm all good. I can't get my head around these. And then obviously you have Sky News and everybody else trying to be sympathetic towards this woman and go, oh, well, not all migrants are bad. No, not all migrants are bad. But it's the same old story, isn't it? It's the bowl of sweets. If I give your kid a bowl of sweets and there's 100 sweets in there, and I turn around and say 8 of those sweets, actually it's more now because statistically it was 2 and now we've got the new figures, it's 8, will kill you. But have a sweet. That's literally what we're saying to the populace of the country. Have a sweet out there. You might die, but you might just get a sweet. But when it comes to hypocrisy, when it comes to the NHS and everything about it, this fucking argument just, whenever they turn around, oh, well, our NHS will collapse. The other problem is, we are not employing British doctors. We are not employing British nurses because it's too expensive. I don't even know what to say. I honestly don't know what to say with these people sometimes, because you're kind of sat here and, you know, I do sympathise and empathise with her. Obviously, you know, I won't say it's her home because it's not her home. Her home's in Uganda with her 3 children that I want her to be with. Everybody who's a parent wants to be with their children. But because of UK policy, the UK government's policy, and using the loophole, they took that woman away from her children on the promise of more money. Well, it's not more money, is it? It's the equivalent of 1.4 million. But that is the point. And yet we're meant to be feeling sympathy because they've taken an economic migrant. And this is kind of what the problem is. We're not solving our own problems. We're going elsewhere to another country to get them to solve a key working gap. But there isn't a key working gap because the people that could take the jobs aren't getting the jobs because they're not being given. They're going abroad now because they get more money, which is the same as what this lady did as well. Because the NHS will not pay them what they need to pay them. And not be, this is not my statistics, within the NHS, 1 British nurse is worth the equivalent of 2 nurses come from Nigeria or Uganda because of their skill set. I don't even know where to go. I honestly don't. I see this on the TV. There was loads of red flags that went off when I obviously she's in tears and you know, if I could give her letters back, I really would. I have empathy for her. But the point is, that is the point. She's left her country on the promise of more money because of the UK government. And the libtards have turned around and said, well, without immigrants, we wouldn't have an NHS. But they're quite happy for everybody to die over here of minor ailments. We're not talking like major stuff. Of minor ailments, etc. And also they've got an Ebola outbreak now in Uganda because of the influx of refugees from the Congo. And then we're turning around and we've got to have sympathy for her. And we've got to be sympathetic to all migrants because they're great within our community. You know, they're contributors of our community because they're a nurse. But what we're saying is, right, they're aiding our community and fuck her community over here. They can all die. Am I insane? Tell me if I'm insane. It's fine. Oh, I can't remember what the tag was. But yes, I have read 1984. The quote that I put up from George Orwell wasn't from 1984, which you should know because obviously you're pretending you did know 1984. That was his deathbed quote. Just so you know, which is why I went, what on earth are you talking about?